Welcome to the Doctors Making a Difference podcast, where we help physicians to be empowered with the tools they need to be successful in medicine, in finance, and in life. Join us as we highlight doctors and other professionals around the world who are making a difference. We get the privilege today to meet Dr. Hardeep Phull. Hardeep is an oncologist who is passionate about patient care, passionate about his specialty of medicine. And I'll tell you, as a cancer patient and a doctor, I think Hardeep's story is fascinating. And I think you're going to enjoy it as you get to know this. So with that, Dr. Hardeep Phull, would you mind introducing yourself to our audience?
Absolutely. Thanks, Peter. I really appreciate being here. As you said, I'm an oncologist. I'm actually many things. I wear many hats. I'm a girl dad. I'm a husband. Um, I'm an avid sports fan.
That's awesome.
I like sailing, flying planes. We talk about how everyone's multidimensional. There's so many layers to all of us. And so I'm so happy to talk about my journey. And also, I'd love to hear about yours and your perspectives as a patient and client of our field.
Oh yeah, no, it's interesting. We were talking just for a second before we hit record how these stories that intertwine all of us. They're stories of human beings, and they connect us, and I think that's ultimately what keeps us coming to medicine. Is you realize it's not just doing a job; it's connecting with another person. And I think that both in our patient care and in the rest of our lives, and I know like in podcasting, that's the stuff I've enjoyed the most is the connection with another person. And so that's a beautiful part of it for sure. Tell us your story, Hardeep. How did you end up as a doctor?
I actually first wanted to be an engineer. My dad was an engineer at IBM, and back in the 1980s, that was like the Google of,
Yeah,
companies, and it was an amazing company. And he would take me to work and show me all the cool things they were doing with storage drives and robotics and things, and I was just mesmerized. I was convinced I'm going to be an IBM engineer. Um, Back then, companies really took care of their employees, and there was like a lot of loyalty. People stayed at the same company for 40 years.
right.
That's what my dad did. And he would go on business trips to Europe. I didn't go to all of those, but uh, to Tokyo. He would have colleagues all around the world. They would visit also our town and sometimes even come over for dinner. And I was so enveloped in that. I would sit at dinner with my dad's friends, colleagues from across the world, and they would talk to me about their engineering feats or projects rather. But they were normal people, they were nice people. And I was just thinking, wow, I'm so lucky to be talking to these geniuses. I thought they were all geniuses. But it really was when my mom went to nursing school, um, kind of in her early 30s, she went to nursing school. I'm from India originally, but she was a boarding school teacher in India. But when she came here, she didn't want to be a teacher. She thought the system wasn't quite the caliber as the one she had as a very prestigious boarding teacher in a big school in
Hmm.
India. But so she went into nursing school, um, and I would then see her go through her practicals and how hard she studied. And really, what it ended up doing, what she ended up doing, is taking me to work with her. And so, we talk about these take your kid to work day. I really think those have a big impact because clearly, look at me.
Yeah.
Go from engineer because I'm going to work with my dad to medicine because I'm going to work with my mom. She was working first in cardiology, and so I would be trying to make sense of these strips, the EKG strips and rhythms, and I thought it was just like my dad's work, like engineering and fascinating, like all these um, electrical signals that somehow someone can monitor and know what's going on with someone's heart from just a sensor. I thought, what, that's amazing. How is that possible? Um, so that led to opportunities with rounding with doctors and talking with them. And I was again very enthralled by that. But what's interesting, Peter, is she then did a rotation in oncology.
Hmm.
And this was at the VA hospital in Tucson, Arizona. So it's a government hospital. But the best thing about that could ever have happened to me, even though I didn't know even back then I was going to do oncology, is that she just during the summer, I would just go to work with her and I became a volunteer at the VA and I would spend 8 to 10 hours a day there. It was like a job every day and I became attached to it and I became attached to the people. and especially the ones in oncology. Um, I still remember a gentleman who had a movement disorder, but he was on chemo. His head was shaking from side to side so much he couldn't bring a spoon, to his
Hmm.
mouth. So I would sit there and basically during lunch, I would look forward to this. I'm like, all right, it's his lunchtime. I get to feed him. I would bring his lunch tray to him and we would talk and I would be feeding him as his neck is moving because he couldn't
He
coordinate
couldn't
his
control it,
arm and his
right?
neck because the movement disorder. I just it was such an amazing thing to do. As I think I was a junior high, maybe eighth or ninth grade kid, and I just thought, wow, I have the most important job in the hospital right now. No one else can do this but me. I mean, I just felt so special that I get to do this. It was such a privilege, and it was humbling. I'm feeding this guy who can't feed himself, and he's so thankful for it. It's almost like you're providing like love and care and concierge service, compassion, all of it, while doing a basic need, feeding someone,
Yeah. How cool
nutrition.
you had those experiences at that age.
Yeah,
I was going
so
to ask how
early.
old you were. Yeah, seventh, eighth, ninth grade. I mean, I've got children that age and they want to experience
Yeah,
everything and it's exciting. And so, how cool that you had that like hands-on, real life, meaningful experience
yeah.
at that young, impressionable age.
I was lucky. I think I was in eighth grade. I think I was 14 or
Yeah,
15. And, at that point, I realized, okay, I'm doing medicine. The other thing that came in my head at that time is being a pilot. I don't know where that came in, but I've always just wanted to be in the air. And so I always said, I'm going to be a commercial pilot. Back then, I started to have glasses. And so I'm like, "Ah, I can't be a military pilot anymore. I really wanted to go
right.
in the military and, fly cool fighter jets. But really, it was my mom who said, she basically said, she used this word. She said, piloting's just a glamorous field. You'll see. You won't like it.
Hmm.
Medicine, it's more, real. You get to meet people. And the thing was, here I was in this cancer ward doing these meaningful things. So I saw that. But, back then, if I feel like we're past the golden age of aviation, by the way, Peter. If I was flying to come see you, I'd be regretting it because, you know, planes are now basically tubes full of people who are coughing and sneezing, and the service isn't the same,
Yeah,
and
it's more of a bust than
more of a bus. Yeah,
than a
and
glamorous experience
yeah,
for
and then
sure.
the seats are all like super crammed, and even in first class, it's that way. But back then, when I was same age, and this was maybe 1990s, like I would dress up to go on a plane. And I
Hmm.
remember, when aviation first came out, people were dressing up like in their suits and ties and stuff. I wasn't doing it to that level, but I thought it was such a privilege, and I thought it was so cool to be a passenger in a jet, and I would do everything I can to talk to the pilot or get a tour of the cockpit. But I took that advice to heed from my mom that it's a glamorous field. It sounds all fun, but it's not just all fun and games. But really, medicine became meaningful more than just glamour. It became connecting with people. And then so in high school, I really committed myself to that, and I said, okay, I'm going to be a doctor. I better learn science and math. And I was a very good student, but um, that's where it started. And then college happened, and then there was a post-college research experience, and much more after that, leading me finally down to medical school because it was quite a journey, I think, to get into medical school, which
Oh
many people
yeah.
don't realize.
I don't think anybody would have just done it. You have to have almost everybody when you visit with somebody who chose to go down that path. Almost everybody has something where they can reflect back and say, "I went into this because I felt like I could make a difference, or I felt like I
Hmm.
could really
Hmm.
change something, or I had this meaningful connection with somebody." And it sounds like you had that even at that really young age. And did you ever change your mind? I mean, a few times through college, or were you kind of set on that from that kind of adolescent time frame?
I was basically set on it. I mean, this is kind of sad because even in high school, I used to love sports, and I gave up sports halfway through, which I should have never done because I loved tennis and basketball and played on the team, and I still have friends to this day from those teams that I
Yeah.
talked to. I mean, I loved it, and I gave it up because I was not only did I want to go to med school, but there's these sort of combined programs you may have heard of, yeah, right? The kind of combined college and med school all in
Yes.
one without any, prerequisites. You have to study super hard and be like top of your class in high school and do very well on your SATs. So that was my goal in ninth grade to
Wow.
get into basically med school at, after I graduate high school. And that didn't work out. I applied to all those programs. I got waitlisted. I was almost there, but not quite.
Hmm.
Um, I look back and I realized despite all that experience, I had about 1,300 hours of volunteer work at the VA at
Hmm.
that point, and I had straight A's and all this stuff. I had good grades, but I realized I look back and I think about how I talked and how I presented myself, and even those interviews back then as a high school student. And I remember thinking I was just way too immature. And even though I knew I would be fine, it was a huge disappointment
Hmm.
not to get in. And then so then I went to my state college in Arizona, which by the way was a great school. I got a scholarship and great school, but it was kind of bummed out. I was bummed
Yeah.
out that I didn't get my dream. So
Well,
that was one of my first failures. It was really hard.
when you talk to people, most people don't have this like linear thing where everything just worked out perfectly in their life. Like it's kind
Yeah.
of not reality for most people. For some people, I guess everything just kind of worked out when you try, but most people have fits and starts along the way, and
Mhm.
the fact that you experienced a disappointment, but then came back and said, "Yep, I still actually want to do this." You found a way,
Absolutely. And I went through the regular conventional way. It's not like I was so far back. It's just in your head you realize you failed. But the best thing that happened to me about staying in Arizona, I stayed close to family and friends. But the other failure I kind of had, if you want to call it a failure, I there was a big research program in our university where most of the pre-meds got into, and all of my friends were getting into these labs that were all health science based and cool looking projects and cancer and heart disease. And I didn't, I again failed in getting into the laboratory of my choice. And all they had left over, so to speak, was in a plant sciences lab on campus. And I said to myself, well, I'm not going to become a botanist. Why am I doing this? But the program director there said, hey, you get paid to do this research. It looks good on your resume. Go look at plant sciences. They're good people. You'll learn
hmm
the same science. It doesn't matter if it's on
right?
plants or uh, petri dishes or stem cells. It doesn't matter. And gosh, what wise advice that was.
hmm
Um, I had a full circle moment with this, but basically, I ended up working in a plant science lab where they were doing some of the coolest genetic technology that people all over the world were traveling to come learn at our laboratory.
Hmm.
So here's now this freshman slash sophomore in college who's learning this really cool technology. It's called microarrays, where you could print these high grid, high density arrays of DNA information from plants onto slides and hybridize them with different RNAs in different situations, like stress that you put on plants, including drought stress, salt stress. And you could basically analyze the entire genome in one fell swoop on these microarray assays and see what was up expressed, down expressed on the entire gene panel. And this was before the era of, genomic sequencing, where you could
Right.
just sequence everything real quick. And so I was learning this cool technology and helping train scientists around the world who were visiting. And then, my role in the lab almost became like a lab ambassador where people are coming in all across the world and they are being put up in apartments or hotels, but my parents always instilled in me this idea that you should welcome visitors to your home, just like my dad had welcomed his colleagues
Right.
from his business trips to our house for dinner. So all of them would come to my house for dinner, and my mom would
Oh,
cook
how
for them.
cool.
Yeah, all of them would want to say, you know what? I've never been to the Grand Canyon, and I said, you know what? I've only been like 13 times. Let's go
Let's
tomorrow.
go.
Let's go on the weekend. And so it was really cool. That lab ambassadorship actually led to a study abroad experience in Poland because we had some Polish colleagues. They invited me there. So there was a full paid semester trip to Poland, completely paid to do research, to still take some classes, learn a new culture. It's something I would have never done had I not picked that lab. You see, it's all connected. And I was just there at the the 36th annual kind of anniversary of this program. It's called UBURP,
hmm
Undergraduate Biology Research Program. And I was the keynote speaker, and they invited me back to talk about my experience. And I literally, I put this on LinkedIn about in January. I literally, talked about all of this and my title of my talk was, I think it was something like Science, Medicine, and Life. Get out of your own way. Because I
hmm
talked about how I had no idea what I was doing, but if I had gotten in my way and tried to stop it, all these meaningful experiences wouldn't have happened, including that trip to Poland and all I learned there, all the people I met.
Well, and it's
Um,
the connections. Like, no
yeah,
matter. I mean, I think the farther along you go in your career, you realize it's the connections with people, your professional colleagues, your peers. That's why they invited you to Poland. They're like, oh, we want Hardeep to come. He invited us to his house. He took us to the Grand Canyon. He's a real person we can talk to, and it's cool.
There's a lot of luck too and timing, and there
Yeah.
happened to be some funding. That same program that used to send dozens of students abroad now only can send four abroad because the funding has dried out. So
Hmm.
even I now feel, the pay it forward or pay it backward mentality. I need to now start funding a student because think the impact that has on someone, a human being, whether it's just not just me, but the people I met, it's a unique thing that it's not just college is not just going to class and getting scores and check box, go to the next step. I think college is an experience, and you need that experience to mature and become the person you are to get to that next step. But many people view it as it's in the way. It's in the way of the pre-med mentality. You know
Hmm.
this. You gotta get through this and be the best student, kind of get to the best school, and that you have competition in front of you. And that's sadly also many ways in how my some of my colleagues have fallen into, and it's not bad. I mean that's good. Some of the best doctors I know were the stellar stars of the class, and I wasn't that necessarily. I didn't have the best scores or was the smartest or the most of a gunner, let's just call it. Um, but it's very easy to get in that mentality where you say, "I need to get done with this phase of my life. I need to just get this over with. Come on, come on, come on." And
Right.
when you're supposed to be saying, I'll never get this again. I'll never be this age again. I'll never be in this position in my life. Have these interesting stressors, but not the later life stressors that are going to be different.
I remember one time, yeah, when I was in a college class, I remember the professor kind of scolded us because we were being loud and obnoxious and, probably not taking it seriously. And he said that, and I don't know why it stuck with me, but he said, you people don't realize that you're in a situation right now that you'll never be in again. The opportunity to rub shoulders with these people and to be in this setting is unique. And,
Mhm.
you take it for granted because you come here every day, but after this semester, after this year, after this chapter, it's over. You never get to be in
Mhm.
this situation like this ever again. So that's kind of cool, Hardeep, that you were able to find that a little bit and say, okay, I'm just gonna live the experience as it goes on, and that genuine appreciation of moment by moment, those forge those relationships, and then give you opportunities later on for sure.
Mhm. Absolutely.
The other one I thought was interesting is you just reflected on that is so you became an oncologist eventually, but you have this awesome background in genomics, and
Yeah.
in understanding, plant biology and gene sequencing and all that. I mean, that's what I mean. A lot of oncology is really about gene patterns and expression of genes and proteins. I mean, all of medicine is that way, but especially oncology, we're really targeting specific protein expression on genes to try to target some of these cancers. So I think that's kind of an interesting thing that's probably informed,
Mhm.
probably been useful in your career as you've gone through it. And you probably never would have envisioned it quite that way when you took up a thing in a botany lab, and yet it's helped you, I'm sure, in many
I mean,
ways.
it wasn't botany, it was plant sciences,
Yeah,
plant
plant science.
genomics. You know,
Yeah,
I said the word botany because that's what my immature brain
yeah.
thought. What the heck are you doing? But it's not, it wasn't botany, it was genomics, it was genetics, and it was exciting and it was cutting edge. And they were doing the same thing in human laboratories, but I think letting an undergrad do those types of assays, which are expensive and the technology, letting me do that. I don't think I would have gotten that opportunity except in that specific laboratory, to be quite honest with you. And it's not like I was the most special one and the most gifted person they had seen. I think I was very average, and I showed up, I cared, I was hardworking, but I didn't think of myself as like, I've earned this and I've earned the right to do this genomics and I am the smartest one here. I think I was just present. And I was also, to be quite honest, the other thing I forget to mention is I was quite a goofball too. I would have a really good time. And some of it was probably silly humor, but a lot of it was just a lot of fun. I mean, that became my friend base in many ways. The people in the laboratory, we would hang out a lot. We would go to lunch. It was like most people go to college, and it's if you live in the dorms or even if you live off campus, it's like, all right, I got this class, then I've got this event, then this class, then I can go home and study or go to the library. To me, it's like I'm gonna go to the lab, and then there's gonna be a class, and I got to get back to lunch so I can eat with my uh, lab, I eat with other students too, but oh, we have this lab gathering. Oh, we have the lab celebration afterwards. This person's graduating or leaving. Um, it became revolved around the laboratory, really, my schedule. And it was perfect. It was like I had a home space. It almost felt like my own space, the
Hmm.
laboratory. Like it's where I would reset to. Now my
That's
home
so
room,
cool.
if that
Yeah,
makes
your
any sense.
homeroom. Yeah, your homeroom
Home
lab.
room. I mean, plus, all there we had tons of computers you could print. I mean, to a student, it's like, oh, this is all free. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
But um, there's a place I can get a lot done or start an experiment and have it cooking while I go do a class and come back and finish it. And the most amazing part of it is Peter, I was paid for this. So
Hmm.
I felt like, wow, I'm making money while I'm doing something valuable, but it doesn't feel like I'm working. I'm actually just like kind of being paid to learn.
Yeah, it's awesome.
That's
Well,
cool.
so eventually you finished up undergrad. You went to med school and became an oncologist. Tell us the rest of the story. How did you?
Oh
How did the
God.
rest of that journey go?
Believe it or not, that foray into Poland led to a delay in my application because I couldn't take the MCAT on time. It was like my senior year. And so I actually delayed myself by one application cycle. Um, and so because of that, like I'm like, all right, I'm going to have 1 year off. What am I going to do in that year? And so I started looking for jobs. And, being in molecular biology, I started looking for, kind of jobs again in healthcare in laboratories at the local, university hospital. And so another failure. I applied to so many and got rejected, rejected, rejected. I thought, man, I thought I was smart. I thought I went to this cool plant sciences lab and did cool things that no one else has done and went to Poland, but nobody wants me. But I got very lucky. There was a new urologist who had just come to Arizona and he was doing research on um, kind of more on kidney and kidney cancer, something I would have never thought about, but nevertheless doing a lot of genomics, but also procedural stuff, models on mice and rats, and studying urological problems. Things something I had no experience with, but I don't know what it was about that day, but that interview went so well. He happened to know some of my friends in the community. Um, I showed him my thesis for my plant sciences, and he was just enthralled by some of those, some of the work I had done. Whereas everyone else was kind of like, "We'll call you later." Okay. So for whatever reason, that was placed in my lap, and that was at the right place at the right time. And maybe those failures at those other places were for a reason,
Right.
because that lab now, that urology lab, became my job then, and it was supposed to be for 2 years, but it ended up being for three.
Oh,
Three
really?
years. Here's this
Interesting.
guy supposed to go to med school, and now I'm waiting 3 years, adding another extra 3 years. But in that time, I became sort of the laboratory manager for a urology residency program in which the residents rotated through a laboratory and very smart doctors, surgeons who also are doing research they have to do it in a research year, so to speak. And so I'm setting up these experiments and things, and they're doing the surgeries, and we're learning together. And then now that becomes like a new friend base because now my colleagues have kind of moved on from
Hmm.
college. Most of them left town or went to grad school. So it's kind of like a lonely feeling, but now I have this new kind of friend group and they're super smart. They've been through med school and they're in training. And I learned so much from them. We go to conferences together. But one of the best things about that experience is the number of papers I was able to write as a lab, technician basically. Most people in that role are just there to work and do the work and the doctors get the credit. You may be, acknowledged in the bottom, but I was actually kind of like, all right, well, we don't have time to do this. You write it up. We'll help you, but you write up the papers and
Hmm.
you present some of the conferences. So I still remember 2004, my first conference in San Diego at the Western section of the American Neurological Association in San Diego, giving a podium presentation. I'm like sweating bullets, and I'm like, why am I here? And I'm talking about our research. This was looking at ischemia and kidney models of in mice, and we would make these kidneys ischemic because that's what would happen during kidney surgery, and then we would deliver gene therapy through specific tissue sealants and hydrogels to try to reverse the ischemic injury that was happening while the kidney was clamped with a vascular clamp. So it was very fascinating stuff, and no one else was doing, cool stuff. But I loved how all the urologists were thinking outside the box like that. That's how they viewed problems. They would say, well, if that's a problem, we could try this and we could fix it with this surgical technique. And so, I was basically presenting this podium presentation, probably 20 slides in front of a huge group of people who are way smarter than I am. And I just felt like, what am I doing here? I think I even I had this PowerPoint laser and I shined it in my eye. And, I remember my boss like laughing at me from in the audience. But it went well. I was able to recover and just, you know, I did a good job. But I remember thinking like, wow, I can actually do this. I could even be a scientist, maybe even a physician scientist.
Right.
Um, and what's interesting is someone at that conference was from the eventual med school I would go to at the Cleveland Clinic. And he went to my boss and said, you should tell this guy to apply to the Cleveland Clinic. He's got the skills and he could be a physician scientist. This is exactly the type of stuff they're
Right.
looking for. So I didn't think of it back then that I belong at Cleveland Clinic, but that was interesting. That was impressionable on me that, wow, this will help me now get into this time I'm spending, this 3 years is not just for making money and a pause from med school, but it'll actually get me to the next level to a place, where I belong.
So is that where did you end up going to medical school then?
At the Cleveland Clinic at
Okay,
the
you did
Learning
go
College
there.
of Medicine. And there's
Yeah.
the other failure in life. I applied after that year thinking, all right, I got this. I got all these papers, I got all these experiences, and I got waitlisted a couple of
Hmm.
med schools, but I did not get in. I made several mistakes in the application cycle, like applying late and only applying to, super competitive med schools. And so I was very heartbroken by that. This is now 2 years post undergrad, and I'm like, geez, still not in. And my dad, the engineer, said, you got to look at this as an engineering problem, as a mathematical problem. You only applied to this many schools and you applied to ones that take 1% acceptance rate.
Right.
That's not good math. So back then, we had the internet, but they didn't publish all these things on the internet. They had, I don't know if you remember these like sort of college prep textbooks that had like information about schools and how many in the class
Yeah.
and their admissions policy. So my dad literally bought one of those for med school and he went through every US med school, looked at the out-of-state acceptance, looked at the percentage from Arizona they take, um, the ethnicities, all of these things, and basically whittled down to the fact that New York State and Ohio take some of the highest out-of-state percentages in the entire country, along with a handful of others. Um, and basically got me he even called some of these places. He did a phone call. So you talk about really going beyond, above and beyond. And and of course I'm telling them, stop, I don't need your help. I can do this myself. I don't need this. But we whittled it down to a list of, I think, like 20 schools, some that I've never heard of. And I'm like, what are we doing? But lo and behold, he was 100% right. I think I got into like 7 schools and I had the luxury of choosing which one. And I'm like, I didn't know which one to pick. And at some point, I'd already gotten into schools and I was still getting interviews. And I just went on them anyways. And I'm like, it doesn't hurt to see another school or meet another person or see another city. Um, I was very lucky to have that experience because later on, as you interview for stuff, you get a certain level of confidence when you've done it a lot and when you have nothing to lose, right?
Right. Right.
It used to be that interviews scared me because I'm like, oh, what if I don't make it? I failed at getting my lab position. I failed at the med school, the pre-med kind of college combined program thing. But now interviews became fun and a challenge, and I was no longer nervous. So for the rest of my career after that, interviews were like, you're interviewing me. I have nothing to lose. And that's part of the reason why is that era in my life when I went through it the second time with nothing to lose, and then obviously having gotten in, you really have nothing to lose.
Yeah. So did you stay at the Cleveland Clinic for your medical school and residency both?
No, just med school. And what a great program. That's a physician scientist program. They only took 32 students, so I thought I had no chance getting in there. They took some of the best in the country. But, I think they had the right combination of um, work and research and the right personality, and plus the fact that, I interviewed without any stress. I think I was a very natural, part of that program. Part of the challenge of that program is it was very experimental at the time. There were no grades or exams. It was all portfolio-based learning and competency-based learning, meaning you had to meet competencies, not grade levels. You had to
Hmm.
say you are good at not just medical knowledge, but communication, research, um, science, obviously, clinical skills. There's a set of eight or nine, actually, I think 10 competencies. I'm forgetting them all, but you had to meet them all, and you had to show that you met them all by writing these long portfolios and gathering pieces of evidence throughout your journey to support that you were meeting them. It was a different way of learning, completely, very reflective. But you were expected to kind of learn the science part and the medical part on your own, but through the help of problem-based learning groups, small groups where you solved problems together. And their whole motto was the thought that you can memorize any textbook, but in real life, in your career, you're going to realize that you're learning all the time and things
Right.
change. And so you can't just memorize a textbook in 2006 and say in 2025, you learned it all. No, you need to learn how to learn, have a template for learning, and build on it over time, and constantly reflect on your skills, not just skills of science and knowledge, but empathy and compassion, people skills, being well-rounded. In fact, there was a competency called personal development. You had to actually show personal development to graduate from our program.
Hmm.
You couldn't have just shown up and done well. You had to show some components of personal development beyond, stuff you did in the classroom or in science. And also it was a physician scientist program. So a lot of research. You'd be in the laboratory and doing cool stuff with some of the greatest scientists in the world. So I got a lot of papers out of that, more publications, more presentations at conferences. But really, it was it was very hard. If you ask me, learning in that way, that's a very different way to learn. Most people, I remember my friends at other schools, I told them, God, I wish I could be spoon-fed. I wish I could just be told what to learn it and just move on. I'm like having to, it was very painful, to kind of teach yourself as you go. And of course you have, professors teaching you, but my point is there was no grades or accountability. How'd you know you were doing okay? You know?
Yeah. Well, it's
But they all said
interesting.
you'll do, they also told us you'll do fine, and we all did fine. You just have to buy into the program.
And how did you choose oncology? I mean,
Oh,
that's
yeah, how
one
to
of
choose oncology. Yeah, so
yeah,
remember the urology stuff I did in undergrad,
yeah, yeah.
postbachelorate years. I was convinced have to be a urologist. I had so many research papers and presentations under my belt. I loved the topics. They were such interesting topics. Um, I love the people. Urologists are some of the funniest surgeons. They deal with a funny part of the body sometimes
Right.
too, by the way. But there's a lot of academics in that field, and they do such cool, innovative procedures, always pushing the envelope. And they have kind of a mix of office-based and surgical practice. They do it all. I just absolutely loved it. But really, it came down to well, first, I didn't think I did well enough on my boards to do it, but it really came down to a year of research I did away from Cleveland Clinic. I'd gone to Stanford for a year of research. We had to do 1 year of research as part of med school. And I needed to get out of Cleveland because the weather was killing me. But I met my wife there in the Bay Area
Hmm.
a month after I got there. It totally changed my perspectives on what's important to me.
Yeah.
But also, my research there kind of was failing, and I was kind of second guessing urology suddenly. And I said, but why? Just because I'm doing research in it? Is that really what I love? And so my wife and I got married in that year that I did my research kind of away,
So
which
that was
I
a
would have never planned.
wow, what an important
I,
year. Yeah,
yeah, what an
very
important
important
year.
year.
And not just that, but she came to Cleveland with me. I told her to stay in the Bay Area and I'll be back. Don't worry. But she didn't want a long distance
Right.
relationship after marriage. So we went back to Cleveland, and um, that's where I realized like other people's impression of me matter. Before I was looking in the mirror and just assuming that I'm good at this and good at this. She helped me see what I'm actually good at. And she said to me very frankly, as a wife would do, like, you're the most grumpy and miserable after you've been on a surgical case or
Hmm.
you've had a long day at the hospital where you're on a surgical field. You're happier doing other things. And I started thinking about that.
Hmm.
I'm like, oh my God. And at that time, I remember I did a family practice residence rotation, and I really enjoyed it. Then I did an internal medicine rotation, and I enjoyed it. So one of my mentors said, it's not too late. I know I was in my fourth year almost at this point. So
Right.
literally like a month away from residency applications. He said, it's not too late to do an acting internship in, internal medicine in the hospital. You should do it. So I did it and I absolutely loved it. And I think I loved it because I went with an open mind. Before, everything I did, I went into with a urology mind. I said, that's not relevant to me. I'll show up and do the work, but I'm not going to get interested in it because I'm not going to be doing this long term.
Hmm.
And what a terrible attitude. But I think we all go through that in our careers. We get pigeonholed. We get this laser focused, I'm only doing this. That's what I meant to do. No, I can't do that. I don't have the capacity. But you do have the capacity. And when you open your mind to other things, you might find passions and interests and skills you never had. And so and the other thing I remember a mentor telling me is, in fact, the program director of urology told me this. Yes, and what a great freedom he gave me with this statement. He said, "You'd be a really good urologist, but you have amazing skills in internal medicine. I'll write you a letter for either one." Wow, like
Hmm.
someone who's going to support me, even though I've tried to be a urologist this entire time, he's going to support me to be anything I want and help me do it.
Hmm.
That gave me the real freedom. And so then I interviewed in internal medicine and finally settled on a physician scientist program in San Diego. And that all worked out that way. And I've been in San Diego since, but I did hem-onc fellowship here as well in San
Hmm.
Diego at UCSD. Um, but it took a little while. Internal medicine is a big field, as you know, with like
Right.
10 subspecialties. And I think at that time, again, my wife helped me realize you're happiest when you do this. And it was the rotations in oncology in my residency. And plus the full circleness of everything, Peter. Um, all that oncology work at the VA with my mom
Yeah,
came
back when
back
you're
to me.
in middle
That
school.
passion.
Yeah.
Yeah. Finally came back to me like 20 years later. So it was worthwhile to realize I was always meant to do that.
Now I can reflect just for a second when I am from a small town in Idaho, and I knew that I was probably going to be back being a small town doctor. That's what I always wanted to do. So when I was in medical school, I was like, well, I might have to remember that. I might have to do that. So every single rotation, I was because I loved orthopedics and I loved surgery, general surgery, and I loved internal medicine. I loved pediatrics. I loved ER. Kind of
Yeah.
just loved all of it. And then when it came time to think about, residency, like for me, it was just a slam dunk. Rural family medicine had it all. You worked in the ER, you delivered the baby, you helped with the surgeries, and you were in the clinic and you helped with the pediatrics. And so I think it is interesting to kind of, for everybody that goes through that process to say, okay, I have to not pigeonhole myself
Hmm.
early on. It's good to kind of go and say, well, somewhere along the way, I'll probably need this skill. And surprisingly, stuff that I thought I would never ever need, like it comes back, and I'm like, oh, well, I haven't thought about that for a while. But I'm
Hmm.
glad that I had a rotation in that particular topic, and I think all of us need to be lifelong learners. I think that's one of the joys
Hmm.
of being a doctor. Is
Hmm.
you can't say I. In fact, I think it's defeating if a person says, I have this skill set, I learned it, and now I learned it. I don't need to learn anything else. The doctors that do that probably kind of get burned out and stuck. It's way more fun when you say I'm learning along with you and remain forever fascinated in what's going on in your
Hmm.
life.
Plus, how many times have both of us probably been humbled by things where we were convinced we had figured it out or we knew what was happening? Or, we said to someone, don't worry, you're not going to have cancer or you're cured, and something, changes on you. And you recognize that biology is not a textbook. Biology is unfair, and sometimes it picks on certain people, and there's no rhyme and reason for it. Sometimes the healthiest of people, for example, get cancer. Um, and it's unfair. It happens to young people, old people alike. Um, you get humbled by the stuff you see that would have never been caught by screening.
Right.
Because we say, oh, eat a healthy diet, exercise, do mammograms, colonoscopies, pap smears, etc. You'll be fine. And you usually are fine. But there's stuff that happens. These are all, sadly, some of the guidelines are made for financial reasons, right? They're made because you can only do so much screening before it costs too much to do it. And so they're kind of made at intervals. And, my biggest pet peeve is I think some societies say, stop doing this after 75. It's not going to matter anyways. And I'm like, why would you do that? You know how many 80 and 90-year-olds I see with cancer who would have been able to catch it early had they not been told to stop colonoscopy or mammograms? And so it's interesting, that cancer is one of these things that it's not if, but when. And as you grow older, it's almost inevitable. We have great screening modalities. It's probably moving to genomics and genetics. Hopefully, one day we'll have blood tests that can be screening, kind of DNA screening modalities where you find it early before it's ever formed a lump, but just formed a DNA strand. Um, but just it just still very, very humbling, and I can't even keep up. Oncology now is such a field in which even specific types of oncology. People are subspecializing and they do only that.
Hmm.
So, for example, there'll be a breast oncologist. They don't want to do anything else. There'll be a genitourinary oncologist, a lung oncologist. Um, and that's great because you need people in these fields because those fields by themselves are hard to keep up with. But then you have someone like me who's a generalist who does all oncology. And it gets sometimes I have to really call for help and I ask my colleagues because the field moves so fast. If I was doing even what I was doing 5 years ago or 10 years ago, I would be completely wrong today. Um, so luckily we have tools to help us, but also friends and colleagues. Because again, collegiality, it's a team effort, right? You
Oh
help each
yeah.
other. Um, and I'm lucky to have that. If I was in a rural area like you, Peter, I don't know if I would have that luxury of being able to say, oh, just drive over a few miles to see my colleague for a second opinion. It
No,
might
it's
be
all
hundreds of miles.
I have to call lots of people, but yeah,
Yeah.
when I send somebody to do a second opinion consultation type thing, it's a commitment. Like, hey, you're gonna spend a whole day driving down to Salt Lake City or
Hmm.
Boise or Denver or wherever it may be. It's gonna be a big journey for them to go to those locations, but they'll do it, because sometimes we have to, or occasionally
Yeah.
we'll send people to one of the Mayo clinics or something like that, just because they need to have that. They need to go somewhere where somebody's found their specific thing. But
Hmm.
it's still, no matter where you're at, and in our country, you can generally find people. You have to travel, and sometimes
Yeah.
patients you have to tell them like, well, that's the trade-off for living in a rural area. Sometimes I'm going to send you on a journey to another state because you have something
Hmm.
really unique and specific, and this doctor in this other place does study this and nobody around here does. And so anyway, it's kind of a interesting trade-off.
Yeah. I mean, I think about the luxury of cities and almost how am I going to say this in a nice way? There's almost too much healthcare, too much product, too much competition and unnecessary competition. I'm just thinking about where I'm living and was there like five, six hospital systems within 10 miles, some within 1 mile. And, they're all, that's healthy competition. But I'm thinking about you as a rural physician and the fact that resources are not spread out evenly, but yet in metropolitan centers, it's like patients don't realize this, that they don't need this many groups of healthcare surrounding
Oh
them. They
yeah,
just need
no.
like one or two.
And it's
But
just different across the
yeah.
United States, and then as you go outside the United States, even more distant to get people that kind of understand these fields. Well,
Hmm.
let's shift for a second on, you're an oncologist. You deal with this day in and day out. You help people so much, and like you said, it's a changing field. I've talked a whole bunch on this podcast about my own experience, and so I'm really thankful that it's a changing field. That there's
Hmm.
new progress and new retreatments and things being researched continuously because there are so many different types of cancer, and we can only treat really some of them. Not every you can treat all of them in some way, but you can't necessarily you can't really fix all of them. There's a lot of them that
Hmm.
we can, but when we have drives that say, "Oh, we're going to cure cancer," well, I always think like, "Well, which one?" There's many diseases, and
Yeah.
it's wonderful when you can help, but you still have to be there even in those moments when patients are receiving palliative treatment, or that their life is going to be shortened by the disease because our current technology doesn't treat it. So my question for you, Hardeep, is how come you are still an oncologist? How do you stay engaged, and how do you help other people remain engaged in this complicated, difficult field?
Mhm. Many people don't realize that not everything is gloom and death and destruction. Many cancers are chronic illnesses.
Yeah.
Um, Not all cancers, including some blood cancers, are truly malignant and terminal. Um, so, I've always told people, the cancer journey is a marathon, and so yes, some are sprints, some are aggressive cancers, and we think of those like the pancreatic cancers, the gallbladder cancers, brain cancers. We think about some of the bad players, which are just so fast growing, and they're always, oh, you caught it too late, and it's palliative, and some patients may have a few years left, or any sort of metastatic cancer. But there's also chronic malignancies. There's breast cancers, for example, now, even when they're spread, that can be controlled for years. Um, there's different lines of treatment. We always have first, second line is like, the most chemo intensive, but now often are incorporating immunotherapy and targeted treatments, including oral pills early on in the treatment journey. We're now testing people with genomics on their tumor specimen from the tissue and then from their blood to match any sort of genetic mutation to newer and newer targeted treatments that exist for those mutations. So we're getting more precise in how we treat it, more to the pathway that's altered rather than just a, systemic chemo that destroys everything. So in many ways, we're getting better, and in many ways, not every cancer is equivalent, not even every cancer within a certain category. For example, breast cancer. There's like a dozen flavors of breast
Right.
cancer, and each have different trajectories, outlooks, treatments, but a vast majority are curable. And if you catch it with mammograms, a vast majority with surgery and sometimes radiation, sometimes some cleanup chemo or some hormonal treatment, curable, and that's the most common type. So I think part of the scare is just using the C word. I say the C word cancer, and then the other C word being chemo.
Hmm.
Visceral reactions and emotions go through people's minds when they hear those words. You'd be shocked how many patients who come to my office, often in tears and crying because they think they're dying. And I say, wait a second, where did we get to that? You just have this benign tumor, or you have an early stage this. You're already cured before you saw me. You're just here as a formality. Or no, your doctor sent you to me for this mild anemia, or just to do some testing to rule out this slightly high white blood cell that you've had for 10 years. Don't worry,
Right. Right.
the, you'd be shocked how much of it's maintenance and reassurance too. Not everything is a diagnosis. Do you know how many consults I get for an imaging finding? Oh, hey, my patient went to the ER and after a car accident and they found this lesion on the bone. Can you see them? And I'm like, I don't really want to. There's not much I have to offer. I mean, if they have cancer, you need to have a tissue diagnosis
Right.
that I can treat it. But looking at pictures and telling people, oh, this picture is cancer, this picture is not, this one is, this one's not. It's like, well, should we repeat a special X-ray? Should we do a biopsy? You know, in many ways, we some oncologists get stuck in that world where we're like diagnosticians, in which we're like, well, it could be this, or this. Let's do some studies. But most of the time, that ends up not yielding anything, or we rule out a lot, in fact. And so the many patients don't realize this, that when they're seeing an oncologist, they may be actually supposed to be seeing a hematologist because we're
Right.
hematology, oncology, and not everything in that field is, you know, destructive and terminal. Even the terminal bad player cancers are treatable, and you can still have a dignified journey, and most patients can live even with a previously thought, terminal diagnosis in the 1980s would be a couple of months. Now we're getting out to years with even those diagnoses with highly selective targeted treatments, immunotherapies, and so forth. So I always tell people there's hope. And the other thing I always tell students and some patients is the cure to cancer is actually not curing cancer. It's growing old and dying of something else.
Hmm.
And so the idea that you make it a chronic disease like hypertension or diabetes, and you have it your whole life, not your whole life, but you have it for a while, let's say, but it's stable, it's in remission, or it's, we're on treatment and you're chipping away at it. But, if you can make it a marathon where someone has a chronic cancer for 10, 15, 20 years, well, is that going to be a problem as long as we have treatments and we can catch it in time so they're not symptomatic? And I think that's where the field will head to, hopefully one day, is even making some of our terminal diagnosis um, spread out where people can live years and years and years with them on treatment or even off treatment.
No, it's the world of oncology is, like you say, fascinating. It's changing. I mean, year by year, you have to keep up on it. Um, and I think before we hit record this morning, you said you had a way you kind of do a newsletter letter or something to your fellow oncologists. I want to hear just a little bit about that.
Oh, sure. No, I like to write. Part of the biggest imposter syndrome I developed as a physician was having all this training behind me, including from prestigious institutions, pretending to be a physician scientist. And I say pretending because I didn't end up doing what I was trained to do, all that research, but then never writing grants, never working in a lab, never, being that scientist that's at the forefront. part of that finally caught up to me, and I said, "Man, what do I do? I failed at what they wanted from me." And I again reached out to mentors. And we didn't talk about this enough, how mentors have shaped me and helped me throughout my career. But I again reached out to mentors, and I said, "My gosh, do you know how much great stuff you do in the community that would never get done if you were in academics? And also, did you know how stuffy academics is and how hard it is to get grants? And if you love seeing patients, why the heck would you want to be in the laboratory? If you love people, maybe their whole time in the laboratory was so you learned how to talk to people so that you're good at it now. And we need people on the front lines to do
Yep.
that. And if you didn't have enough of you, well, then we'd be at a loss." So when I started realizing that all of that training was not just the training, it was also communication, people skills, and other skills that can help me in the science can help you, certainly. I started realizing really what I enjoyed about science and lab was, presenting stuff. That was always fun going to conferences, talking, but also writing. And so when I talked to you before the podcast about the blog stuff that I have, the Physicians Weekly, I also write for MedPage Today, which is a kind of an oncology publication. That's just writing either articles on the cancer journey or various things relevant to trainees in physician scientists, um, doctors who have burnout. I talk about burnout all the way up to, reviewing some papers or interesting findings in the field. It just helps me feel like I'm staying relevant, but I'm also a good writer. It helps me use a skill that I like to do. And then, LinkedIn, that's how we met. And a lot of that, by the way, has been sort of, oh, I have an interesting idea. I'm going to post it on LinkedIn because I have colleagues who work on this, and I'm going to make, a post and write about a certain concept or topic, or just highlight something. For example, this podcast, when it's published, I'll probably write a post on it and say, "Oh, I
Right.
love meeting Peter Crane. We talked about this, and this. So amazing what we're doing in the field." That stuff now gives me relevance. It's more than just social media or getting my name out there or being famous or something. It's like I'm contributing something. And to me, writing is like a reflection, a constant reflection. And if you can put it on paper and put it, public, why not? If someone can see your thoughts, I don't share all my thoughts. Some of them can be dark sometimes,
Right.
But my point is, uh, share things that are helpful to others, because why hold it in your mind to yourself?
Well, and I think this whole interview, I think I could point to several spots where we've talked about the power of connectedness.
Hmm.
Your lab friends, your urology research lab friends, the people you met in medical school, your oncology peers that you reach out to, this connectedness that you do through LinkedIn or for the newsletter. I mean, I think that is kind of like one of your superpowers, Hardeep. Staying connected to other people, and obviously that keeps you relevant in the field. In your medical stuff, but it helps you to be able to connect with your colleagues in a way that is meaningful. Well, one of those questions that I wanted to kind of reflect on is, what would you tell an aspiring oncologist, a medical student who says, "I think I might want to be an oncologist. Do I do this because it sounds hard? Some of my patients are going to die, etc." What would you tell them?
I would tell them, you are the future, because everything I know, right, eventually will uh, change. And so you have more potential in your point in your career than I'll ever have the rest of mine. You have more ability to grow. Um, and so I tell them, first of all, hope, that it's a long journey, but remember, you're so talented. Because I think they need to hear that. How many times in my career that was I in a dark place where I felt like giving up, or I hadn't made it, or I failed. And I shared some real failures with you today, Peter. And had there not been someone to pick me up, say it's okay. Um, what's interesting, I'm thinking about when my daughter, she in school they made this little, they had to take a picture of themselves and write like a quote. And I don't know how she wrote this. Maybe she listens to me too much, but she said she showed a picture of her shooting a basketball, and it said next to it, um, "Success is not possible without failure." And I'm like, where the heck did you learn that? And I'm thinking, like, I write about stuff like that all the
She
time. And I
probably
tell,
listens to you.
yeah, I write stuff like that through, like, on LinkedIn, and, to trainees. I just tell that to trainees, and I'm like, oh my God, I should read like a post. He's only in fifth grade, but But I was just thinking about how important it is to teach young people or any people the fact that it's almost like failure is inevitable and struggle is part of the journey, and it's really resilience and getting through it and how you respond to it. Because the ultimate failure, right, is your client. Like if you don't give them the best care or something bad happens, think about it that way. It's not you're not the failure. Your journey is not a failure. In fact, if you try to control it and make it happen a certain way, it won't happen as well as if it happened by itself. If you got out of your own way, kind of like my journey, I wouldn't be here today had it not happened exactly the way it was meant to, including those um, curveballs and going off places, doing things that was in a way wasting time. My dad even once told me like I think you've taken enough time off. You need to really go to school. Like, he liked the pilot's license. He liked them publishing papers and in the lab. He's like, all right, now it's time. And maybe that's why he helped me so much get into med school. But as parents, as mentors, as teachers, it's very hard. You want to mold students into being a certain thing and saying, you got to do it this way. This is the way I did it. But when you realize your own journey and how it happened in a specific way, you can't possibly think that it has to happen like that for everyone. Everyone is valuable and worthy and has specific talents. And more than that, in my opinion, there's a vacancy of jobs in medicine. I think there's going to be a huge shortage of us, especially you, Peter. How many rural family medicine docs who are talented like you and do this wonderful advocacy work and podcasts like you are going to exist in 30 years? Not many. And who's going to fill the gap? So, I feel like we need a workforce. And so I tell students that I say, I know it feels like you're going through the eye of a needle and only the best of the best survive. But in many ways, we need employees. You're a good one. You have the enthusiasm and the knowledge. You have everything at your fingertips. Don't get discouraged. I mean, it's okay to fail, by the way, but don't get discouraged. Pick yourself up. Um, Beyond that, once I establish those relationships, I also show them the truth of medicine, by the way. I show them that sometimes physicians and science are not in charge. It's sometimes insurance companies. You'll see the healthcare system is a for-profit system in this country. You have to contend with that. You have to mix in with that. You have to be profitable. You have to bring in revenue to be relevant. You can't give care for free, sadly. But you can work within a system and enact change meaningfully. You can be an advocate for your patients. Um, and yes, it'll lead to burnout. Yes, it's going to be struggles along the way. That's normal. Embrace it. Because the people who don't embrace the fact that that's normal, I feel like that's the worst gaslighting you can do to a physician. In fact, by the way, labeling them as having burnout. Well, the system just naturally leads to that. So, I talk about this a lot, how it's moral injury, right? You
Hmm.
probably heard that term. It's
Hmm.
not really burnout. Burnout's like the employee's burned out. That's their fault. Moral injury is it's a system that's screwed up, and we're all working in it, doing our best. And so, empowering trainees, or not even trainees, doctors like ourselves, Peter, we all need to hear it. Empowering ourselves to hear that from time to time, that it's okay to have little ruts, failures, struggles along the way. That's part of a meaningful career. That if you didn't have such things, it wouldn't matter as much if it was so easy.
Oh man, this has been great, Hardeep. I just have loved this conversation. I think everybody who listens to this will take something from it, and I know I'm going to take away the idea that being connected matters, and that
Absolutely.
those little, I guess, side journeys or sidebars along the journey actually do help you to become a better person. And, it's kind of normal to have fits and starts. And that experience contributes to you being this whole unique person. And anyway,
Hmm.
I really appreciate you taking the time to do this. I hope we connect down the road because I think this
Oh
was
yeah.
great. And I hope that we can stay in touch.
I want to interview you. Next time you're going to be answering the questions because you have so much to offer. It's such an interesting story. I don't know why I've been talking the whole time. I'd love to hear more about you. So
Well,
next time.
sounds good, Hardeep. You keep in touch. Thank you.
Thanks, Peter. You take care.
Thanks for tuning into the Doctors Making a Difference podcast. And thank you for what you do to help your patients and your community. Your work truly helps so many people. We produce this content to help you have the tools you need to stay in medicine and to highlight the amazing work being done by physicians around the world. Please note that while I am a physician, and many of the guests on this program are also physicians or other professionals, The discussions on this podcast do not represent my employer or any professional organizations to which I belong. This podcast is for your information and entertainment only, and should not be taken as professional advice. You should seek appropriate professional advice pertaining to your own situation. Please check out more of our content on our website, doctorsmakingadifference.com. Also, please follow, like, or subscribe on your podcast player or YouTube channel, and give us a 5-star rating. It really helps to spread the message. Finally, if you'd like to be a guest on the podcast, or if you'd like to nominate someone else to be a guest, please visit the website or email admin@doctorsmakingadifference.com. See you next time.